Well, hey you guys, welcome back to the salon. As you can see, I'm finally returning to favorite movies from every year since I was born series. And in case you weren't here last time, we're now on 1985, which was the year that I turned 13 years old. And like many years in the 80s, it was absolutely a great year for horror. And yet again, I have an equal number of honorable mentions as top 5 picks, making this technically sorta a top 10. But you know, what are you gonna do? So, here are my honorable mentions. So, this movie here, loosely, obviously, based on The Bride of Frankenstein, so, you know, based on Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, the novel. It stars Sting, Jennifer Beals, and Clancy Brown. The Bride seemed like it was on cable like every 5 minutes, like back in the 1980s. Hence why I managed to see this thing several dozen times, at least, over the years. Like I said, I think at some point, like I had most of this movie memorized. Now, when this came out, neither critics nor audiences were particularly kind to it. It got stomped on like pretty hard, and it was a box office bomb, not surprisingly. But honestly, I always kind of dug it. There was something about it that just, I don't know. It's very gothic and very overwrought, but there was kind of something about this heaving trashiness that it had that really appealed to me. And it honestly still does because I watched it again pretty recently and I liked it just as much. So I feel like Cat's Eye is one of the better and probably more underrated Stephen King adaptations. It's also a pretty solid anthology film. It has 3 of King's short stories, 2 of which were in one of his, anthologies, and one of which I believe was just written specifically for the movie. Now, the frame story involves this sweet stripy kitty cat. You know, we love the kitty cats, who is apparently getting psychic visions of Drew Barrymore in distress. You know, we've all been there. And eventually the cat works his way to her house by the 3rd story, like passing through the other 2 stories along the way. Now, the stories are, the first one is Quitters Inc., which is about a clinic that's really, really very serious about getting people to stop smoking. Holy shit. The Ledge, about a guy who crosses a crime boss and is forced to make his way around a super, super tall building, like on this teeny tiny little concrete ledge. Horrifying. And General, which is about the kitty cat, that's the cat's name, fighting this really well done, like little goblin creature who is trying to steal Drew Barrymore's breath. You know, again, we've all been there. All the stories are really entertaining, very well acted. The Ledge, in particular, as I mentioned, is pretty terrifying, especially to somebody like me who is absolutely really, really scared of heights. That one just still gives me stress to this day. I also really love the Hero Kitty aspect of the final story. I love Hero Cats, as he kind of matches wits with this creepy little goblin. The goblin in this is really good, by the way, and I think it was done by a person in a costume, but it was done like they built sets big. So like when he walked around the sets, like it looked like he was super tiny, and it looks really, really good. So Phenomena. You guys know how much I love Dario Argento. This is not one of Dario Argento's best films, but it's definitely one of his more interesting kind of what the fuck kind of ones. Now, Phenomena was originally released as Creepers in the United States, with 20 minutes of it cut out, you know, mostly the violence and stuff. But it was later on, like, released as Phenomena as it was intended, like, as it had originally been released in Europe. It's nominally a giallo film, kinda, but it has a bunch of paranormal shit going on, too. So Jennifer Connelly is in this. She plays an American teenager who's attending this remote boarding school in Switzerland, and also she can telepathically communicate with insects because, you know, why not? Now, she eventually becomes embroiled in an investigation into a run of murders committed by, like, a necrophiliac serial killer because her psychic link with insects, specifically maggots, flies, that type of thing, means she can help track the killer's location, like find out where his hideout is. Donald Pleasance is also in this as an entomologist who has a pet chimpanzee for reasons I can't recall right now. The movie is kind of all over the place and doesn't make a whole lot of sense, as my summary probably clued you into. But it's at least a somewhat original idea for a giallo movie, like I said, sort of. And Jennifer Connelly and Donald Pleasance are always worth watching. Silver Bullet. So this was yet another Stephen King joint. This one was an adaptation of his 1983 novella Cycle of the Werewolf, which was released actually as a pretty kick-ass graphic novel. I remember checking it out at the library when I was a kid. Corey Haim is in this, and he stars as like this disabled boy, and he lives in a town called Tarker's Mills in Maine, obviously. And he has this crazy uncle played by the irrepressible Gary Busey, who's kind of drunken, irresponsible, but somehow still charming. Batshittery is really worth the price of admission alone. It's really something to behold. There's also a werewolf, by the way, chowing down on all the residents one by one. And it's really, I mean, it's not much of a mystery as to who the werewolf is, but this is a pretty solid slice of kind of cheesy 80s fun werewolf movie with some kind of acceptably over the top performances and some pretty decent gore effects, too, I gotta say. So, The Stuff. This is directed by the great Larry Cohen. And I call it like a sci-fi horror parody, I guess. And it's a pretty delightful skewering of, I guess, like consumerism and food fads, you know what I mean? Diet fads. It's pretty fucking weird. And it has a ball with its just out there premise. So the titular substance starts bubbling out of the ground in a quarry, and some of the workers at this quarry like taste it because, you know, why wouldn't you just immediately start eating some random white shit that's like spewing out of the dirt? Don't we all do that? Of course. But when they do that, they discover it's irresistibly delicious. So, thenceforth, a shady corporation, as if there's any other kind, especially in 80s movies, they were all fucking shady, starts kind of marketing and selling the substance as the stuff, as this sort of calorie-free dessert, like an alternative to yogurt or ice cream or something like that. But it happens to not only be highly, highly addictive, but is actually a living alien organism that takes over the brains of people who eat it. So it ends up being down to an industrial saboteur named Mo Rutherford, who's played by the awesome Michael Moriarty, who was in a lot of Larry Cohen's movies, and a kind of bitter, broke junk food businessman named Chocolate Chip Charlie, played by the equally awesome Garrett Morris, to kind of warn the public about the stuff before it's too late and everybody turns into zombies, pretty much. And that's all the honorable mentions, so let's get on to the main event. So, Day of the Dead. Although this is my, and probably most people's, least favorite of George Romero's original Dead trilogy, it's still pretty rad. And honestly, I think it has some of the best gore gags of the entire series, at least in my humble opinion. Plus, it's got Bub. I mean, what else do you need? So set 7 years after Dawn of the Dead, obviously 7 years after the movie Dawn of the Dead came out too, so that was nice. The world in the meantime has pretty much gone to shit. Zombies have ravaged humanity, and there's your standard ragtag group of survivors holed up in an underground bunker in the Florida Everglades. Now, being a Florida native myself, I'm not entirely sure how feasible a bunker would be under a swamp. Like, pretty much all of Florida is right at sea level, in case you didn't know. And if you dig down just a couple of feet, there's water, you know what I mean? But, you know, I'm neither a structural engineer, nor am I in the midst of a zombie apocalypse, so I'm just going to give it a pass. So, anyway, our cast of potential zombie hors d'oeuvres includes Sarah, who's a scientist who's kind of way too sensible for all this shit. John, aka Flyboy, who is kind of a chill helicopter pilot who doesn't really give a crap about this. He just wants to sip cocktails and probably smoke weed on a beach somewhere. And there's also a passel of trigger-happy soldiers led by Captain Rhodes, who is one of the most rabid assholes ever immortalized on film. So they're all kind of stuck together, trying to figure out how to survive in this bunker while zombies shuffle around outside like boomers waiting for the Golden Corral to open. Oh, and there's also Dr. Logan, aka Frankenstein, who's obsessed with domesticating zombies. Now, his star pupil is Bub, who's a friendly-ish zombie. He salutes, he listens to music on his Walkman, he even tries to talk, It's all pretty adorable until you remember he'd still eat your face off if given half the chance. He's a fucking zombie, you know what I mean? So Logan's big plan is to train zombies to be less, bitey, which is a noble goal, all things considered. But Rhodes and his goons think science is for nerds and would rather just shoot everything that moves. As you might expect, tensions between the two factions boil over pretty quickly, especially after Rhodes discovers that Logan has been feeding bits of his dead soldiers to Bub as reinforcement for good behavior. Which, as big of a douchebag as Rhodes is still kind of fucked up, Dr. Logan. So Logan is pretty much gone full on banana pants. Rhodes has locked up and or beaten up anyone who isn't going along with his agenda, and the zombies are just kind of waiting for somebody to leave the bunker door unlocked. Spoiler alert, someone does. And then cue the requisite zombie invasion, in which several people are gruesomely killed, and Rhodes in particular gets his delicious, amazingly disgusting comeuppance by being completely torn in half while very hoarsely screaming, "Choke on him!" The in question, of course, being his glistening, delectable entrails. Oh, and fun fact, almost all the guts, I think, that you see sloshing out of Rhodes in that iconic scene are real pig entrails. And effects master, legend, Tom Savini, has told a wonderful story about the refrigerator where said entrails were being stored losing power over the Christmas holiday while everyone was gone. So when they got back, wow, they got a really, really nasty surprise. So the cast was thus obliged to film the scene, that scene where he gets torn in half, with like menthol-soaked cotton balls like up their noses and shit like that because of the horrible, horrible smell. And I'm just sitting there thinking, man, the sacrifices that horror actors and crew members have to make just to entertain weirdos like me will just never fail to be awe-inspiring. So yeah, even though I think it's the least of Romero's original trilogy, it's still like a really darkly funny mix of like some great gore, this kind of tone of existential dread. And the whole thing is just, well, as a lot of zombie movies are, just humans being their own worst enemies. Like, they can't even get along, like, to fight a common foe. And the special effects, as I mentioned, are spectacular. Besides the Rhodes getting torn in half gag, which is my favorite, there's also a pretty fantastic sequence where, like, this eviscerated zombie, like, rolls over on a gurney and, like, all his innards plop out onto the floor. It's pretty great. So the whole vibe of the movie is satirical, but it's still, like, really grim and still really claustrophobic and tense at the same time. And I'm going to say that Bub is like easily the most lovable, sympathetic character in the whole thing, even though he's a zombie. And he very rightfully became a minor horror icon in his own right. So yeah, Fright Night. I've already talked a little bit about this film, which is Tom Holland's directorial debut. I've also done a review of its kind of better than it needed to be sequel. But, even though I've talked about it before, it's like, let's be honest, how can I not include on this list one of the best vampire films of all time, not to mention one of the best horror comedies of all time? So I'll try not to repeat myself too much, but I just love Fright Night so fucking much, and it's a movie that I never, ever get tired of revisiting. So we have Charlie Brewster, who's a slightly dweeby, but still kind of affable, horror-obsessed high schooler. And he's living a perfectly normal suburban life with his single mom. I think her name is Judy. And he has kind of a like-minded, like, weirdo best friend named Evil Ed, and a goody-two-shoes girlfriend named Amy, whose high-waisted 80s pants he's been constantly trying and failing to get into. She's not letting him have any. So everything's kind of going along swimmingly until one night he notices that his suave, handsome new neighbor, whose name is Jerry Dandridge, sinking a disturbingly authentic-looking set of fangs into the throat of a beautiful young woman that he has brought home, who appears to be an escort, I guess. Not long after this, Charlie sees Jerry and Jerry's roommate, quote-unquote, Billy Cole, carrying a very suspiciously looking corpse-shaped garbage bag out of the house and loading it into the back of their car. And then, to his utter horror, Charlie later sees the same woman's picture on the news, like, after her body is found. So, of course, Charlie is trying to convince everybody that the new neighbor is, you know, eine Nosferatu, a vampire. But they all think he's just watched too many scary movies and he's just wildly overreacting. Why he didn't just go with the thing, hey, I think he's a serial killer. He does eventually, like, figure that out, but you know what I mean. So he kind of gets desperate and he contacts this washed up horror host named Peter Vincent, who's played by the late great Roddy McDowall. He's completely delightful in this because Charlie has been a big fan of his like late night, you know, horror movie show or whatever. Now, Peter also thinks the kid is nuts and blows him off as kind of an obsessed stalker. But as time goes on, Amy and Evil Ed get so worried about Charlie's mental state, like believing that his neighbor is a vampire, that they essentially bribe Peter into going over to Jerry's house to conduct a vampire test on him to dissuade Charlie from his seeming delusions. Well, since Jerry actually is a vampire, and eventually seduces and attempts to turn Amy into a vampire, the gang ends up having to kind of sharpen their stakes and battle the vampire before he kills them all. This is a particularly tall order for Peter Vincent, who, despite his vampire killer TV persona, is a big fat coward. So Fright Night is like a completely flawless balance between horror, comedy, and like genuine heart, like genuine emotional stakes. All the characters are really endearing and they all play well off one another, like you actually care about them. The chemistry is especially good between Charlie and Peter, like as their friendship develops. Jerry Dandridge is also, played by Chris Sarandon. He is a fantastic villain. He's very smooth, very charming, very charismatic. You could totally see like how people would fall for it. But he's also like really, really menacing and really scary, like when he needs to be. The special effects in this also incredible. The standouts to me, at least, are Evil Ed's like wolf transformation. That looks really good, and Amy's really grotesque vampire form, which I've done for Halloween a couple of years. Matter of fact, so everything about Fright Night to me is perfect, and I wouldn't change a single frame of it. So let me throw two phrases at you: Toby Hooper and naked space vampires. Now, if your interest isn't piqued by that combination of words, I'm not sure we can be friends. So, Lifeforce was actually based on a 1976 novel by Colin Wilson, which had the pretty on-the-nose title of The Space Vampires. Lifeforce is a much better title, honestly. But Lifeforce was actually Toby Hooper's seventh movie, and the first one he directed after, of course, the massive success of 1982's Poltergeist, which was produced by Steven Spielberg, of course. Lifeforce pretty much eviscerated by critics, didn't even make half its budget back. But as with many films of its type, it eventually went on to garner a much-deserved cult following. So we have a crew of British and American astronauts, led by the rugged Colonel Tom Carlson, who's played by Steve Railsback. And they stumble upon a derelict alien ship tucked away in Halley's Comet. You know, who knew that was in there? There it is. Inside this derelict ship, they find three humanoid corpses in glass coffins. Two kind of hunky dudes, and one smoking hot and very, very naked lady, played by the impossibly beautiful French actress slash director Mathilde May, who, like I said, she totally like is the reason to watch this movie, seriously. So the crew decides, just for shits and giggles, to bring these napping nude people, as well as an alien bat creature, I think, back to Earth with them. Now, the space shuttle they were traveling in, which I think was called the Churchill, is kind of gutted by fire, but Carlson manages to get home alone in the escape pod, and the naked alien coffins are recovered from the ruins of the shuttle. Now, as you might expect, the humanoids awaken in short order and start sucking the bioenergy, or life force, one might say, from all and sundry. The special effects on the desiccated victims, like after they get sucked dry, look awesome and have always been like one of my favorite visuals from like any 80s horror movie. We also discover that Carlson somehow has a psychic link with the naked woman vampire, because reasons. And also, by the way, the vampires can also shapeshift and impersonate other people. This talent serves them pretty well when they bust out of the facility they're being housed in and start draining the residents of London left and right. Mathilde May accomplishes this entire rampage without putting on a stitch of clothing, which is one huge point in the movie's favor, because hubba hubba, you know? That's all I'm saying. So it all ends in this big fiery spectacle. The male vampires get killed off. One of them gets staked. I don't remember how the other one gets killed. And Carlson eventually sacrifices himself to kill the female vampire in this big energy explosion that blows out the dome of St. Paul's Cathedral. So Lifeforce is just this deliriously bonkers movie. It leans hard into the absurdity, and I think it's all the better for it. It's kind of like this unhinged fever dream that just kind of throws everything at the wall, like to see what sticks. It's got exploding corpses, it's got folks being chugged down to husks like Capri Suns, copious nudity and gore, and it has Steve Railsback making out with Patrick Stewart, so, you know, what's not to love? Re-Animator. You knew this had to be in here. This is yet another movie that I could watch 1,000 times and just never get sick of. It's just equal parts unhinged genius and just hilarious batshit insanity. Like, you watch this movie and you're just like, what the fuck did I just see? You know what I mean? Some of the shit in here is just crazy. So it's based very, very loosely on H.P. Lovecraft's 1922 novelette, if you want to call it that, Herbert West Reanimator. I mean, this is like a quintessential 80s cult classic. It was directed by the amazing late Stuart Gordon and features one of my longtime horror crushes, the inimitable Jeffrey Combs, who makes everything he's in a million times better. So Jeffrey Combs plays Herbert West, and he's a medical student who gets kicked out of the University of Zurich after bringing his dead professor back to life with this glowing green serum of his own invention. So, you know, he's not one to let one little botched resurrection, Krampus style. So he comes over to the US and enrolls in the famous Miskatonic University in Arkham, Massachusetts, with a view to continuing his work. Once he gets there, he rents a room from another medical student named Dan, whose gorgeous girlfriend Megan, who's played by another one of my horror crushes, Barbara Crampton. You know what I mean? Yeah, so she's the daughter of the dean of the university. So soon enough, Herbert West has set up shop in the basement of this rental house. And though he's clearly a total weirdo, Dan is kind of reluctantly curious as to what he's up to down there. You know what I mean? Now, after West demonstrates his serum by bringing Dan's dead cat back to life, Dan decides he's going to help West with his experiments. Now, because obviously the university faculty isn't on board with all this mad science mumbo jumbo, West and Dan are obliged to kind of conduct their experiments on the down low. Well, there's good news and there's bad news. The good news is the serum works like gangbusters. Man, it just brings everything back to life. Bad news is the corpses who get revived are a little bit aggro and usually have to be taken down with extreme prejudice, which results in just fountains and fountains of goopy, glorious gore. So I have to say, like, Jeffrey Combs just fucking steals the show. Like, he's got this great, snide, condescending attitude, and he's just this stubbornly single-minded. He's just, like, so snotty, but he's just, like, so fun to watch. And he's just so funny. Like, all his lines are so funny. But the whole movie just hangs together so well. Like, it works both as just this gross-out, mad scientist horror and a pitch-black comedy. It's just, like, a really good balance of those two things. The special effects are outstanding, and there are a lot of them. Like, this is a very, very gory what-the-fuck movie. Some of the gags, like I said, just have to be seen to be believed, such as, of course, the infamous sequence where a reanimated Dr. Hill uses his own severed head to attempt to give oral pleasure to a naked Barbara Crampton who's on a gurney. It's really something. So Reanimator was, of course, followed by another Stuart Gordon-directed Lovecraft adaptation, From Beyond, from 1986, which will probably make an appearance on my next list, I would imagine. And it also had two pretty decent sequels, Bride of Reanimator from 1990 and Beyond Reanimator from 2003, both of them absolutely worth watching. So, I mean, if you're a horror fan and you haven't at least seen the first Reanimator, holy crap, what the hell is the matter with you? You have some serious catching up to do. This movie is pretty much universally beloved for a reason. Return of the Living Dead. Now, this is technically nothing directly to do with George Romero's Dead franchise, Although I will note that it was based on John Russo's sequel novel to Romero's Night of the Living Dead, the 1968 original. So it's kind of in the same universe, but not really. Like, you wouldn't really know it from watching. So Return of the Living Dead was the directorial debut of genre legend Dan O'Bannon, who's done lots of things, but is probably best known for writing the screenplay for Alien, obviously a classic. Now, like the aforementioned Reanimator and Fright Night, Return is an unabashed horror comedy, which is this kind of over-the-top zombie movie with a very pronounced, like, punk rock vibe to it. It's also the movie that introduced the concept of zombies specifically eating brains, or brains. So the plot kicks off when two kind of bumbling warehouse workers, the foreman, whose name is Frank, and his new hire, whose name is Freddie, accidentally, crack open a canister of a mysterious military toxin that ends up reanimating a convenient cadaver. And it transforms it into the iconic Tarman zombie, who is so called because of his kind of dark, melty looking appearance. I love the look of the Tarman zombie. He looks fucking amazing. It was actually like two different actors that played him. Their names were Alan Troutman and Robert Bennett. But even like the way he moves and shit like that is just excellent. It's just such a great look. So Frank, Freddie, and their later arriving boss, whose name is Bert, and who's played by Clu Gulager, which I always thought was very funny. I guess that's a Mystery Science Theater thing, because they're always talking about Clu Gulager. You're on Clu Gulager alert. But yeah, so they actually managed to subdue the zombie and kind of cut it into pieces, but not only did they discover that all the pieces can survive independently, which, but they've also unwittingly released the toxic gas, which is called trioxin, into the whole surrounding area. Good job. Meanwhile, a gang of your stereotypical 80s punk rockers, who have names like Spider, Scuzz, and Suicide, are hanging out in a local cemetery. They're actually Freddy's friends, and they're like waiting for him to get off work. And while they're hanging out there, their other friend, Trash, played by horror darling Linnea Quigley, does a very, very naked dance on a tombstone, which is also quite famous. There's a lot of naked ladies in this list, if you hadn't noticed. But I guess the 80s overall was a pretty naked decade. So long story short, corpses start crawling out of the ground in the cemetery and just shambling all over the place. And unlike Romero-style zombies, these can run and talk and kind of plan ahead, you know what I mean? One of the best sequences, in fact, is when a zombie horde has just kind of dispatched this whole contingent of law enforcement officers who have arrived at the scene, and one of the zombies uses the police radio in one of the cruisers to kind of politely request, "Send more cops." So the undead outbreak gets so bad that at the end, the U.S. military calls down a nuclear strike on Louisville, Kentucky, where the warehouse and the cemetery are located, pretty much wiping out all the characters. However, the nuke itself releases even more of the toxin into the atmosphere, which and kind of makes it fall as acid rain, thus setting up the excellent sequel, which came out in 1988, and kind of the whole subsequent franchise, which at this writing I believe totals 5 movies. So Return of the Living Dead is like the platonic ideal of like an 80s horror comedy. Like also kind of, like I said, with this kind of punk rock, like death rock kind of sensibility to it. It's just great. It's very gooey and gross. It's irreverent. It's sort of deranged. And it has a totally kick-ass soundtrack featuring some of my favorite bands ever, like The Cramps, 45 Grave, TSOL, and The Damned. It's just fun as hell, and it's just an absolute blast from start to finish. It is like the quintessential 80s party horror movie. So there's 1985 wrapped up, so be sure to keep watching this channel for whenever the hell I get around to doing 1986. I know, I apologize it takes me so long to do these, but you know what I mean. There's a lot of work that goes into them, so, But I will eventually get around to them, although the ones, every time I think about how many more I have to do, it's just like really overwhelming. So I'm just trying to like keep doing them like one at a time. But I do have a lot of fun doing these though. So yeah, so hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, please remember, like, share, subscribe, and comment, and I'll see you in the salon next time. Bye.